Hello and welcome to today's web seminar titled Successful Agile Planning, an Iteration How-To, featuring Ken Klein, Agile Coach and Scrum Master with Rally Software. Before we begin, I'd like to explain how to participate in today's presentation. First off, if you have any technical difficulties, you may press the Help button on your player console. This will direct you to best resolving common issues. This presentation console has been optimized for viewing at a screen resolution of 1024 by 768 or higher. If your screen resolution is set at a lower level than that, you may have difficulty viewing the entire slide. Display options can normally be adjusted in your operating system's control panel. If you prefer to view this presentation in full screen mode, please click on Enlarge Slides located at the bottom center of the player console. For your reference, all lines have been placed into a listen-only mode during the presentation. We, of course, welcome your questions during today's event. In order to submit your questions to our speaker, simply type your question into the question window on the left-hand side of the console and then hit the Submit button. We will attempt to answer as many questions possible during the Q&A after the presentation. Also, I'd like to inform you that you'll be receiving an email in the next day or so that contains a link to today's archived presentation along with a PDF copy of the slides you'll see today. At this time, I'd like to introduce our speaker, Ken.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ken Klein. I'm an Agile coach with Rally Software. And today I'll be sharing with you what we teach our customer teams about Agile planning and some of the common challenges I see along the way. Often before the classes I teach, I ask students to share a piece of trivia about themselves to help lighten the mood and to help people get to know each other a little better. My piece of trivia is that I was born and raised in Scotland, and I now live in Maryland. So now that I've explained why I might seem to have a funny accent, let's move on to the meat of the presentation. Before I go to the next slide, I should add that we will be following any tweets on this webinar today. So if you'd like to attach the Twitter hashtag RallyDev, we'll be able to follow you on Twitter. As a coach, I spend a lot of time talking to teams, explaining new concepts and ideas, and helping teams achieve a leaner, more agile approach to development. I also spend a great deal of time observing teams as they experience the learning curve of changing the way they do business and develop. Being a good observer and listener is perhaps the most important facet of being a coach. Gathering data and insights through dialogue and observation is the key to providing just the right amount of guidance to help teams achieve lasting success. You'll see these skills demonstrated by all the Rally coaches. As coaches, we also need to exercise patience and the courage to trust teams to fail sometimes, as the experience of failure is sometimes the best learning. Dogma and rhetoric are not words or practices you will see a Rally coach use. We spend a great deal of time with new teams, and I really enjoy delivering a class we call Implementing Agile Teams. We spend one day giving an Agile overview and performing simple exercises to help teams establish muscle memory. On the second day, we help the team plan their first iteration. The next part is my favorite. We leave the team alone to perform their first iteration, and then we return at the end for 2 days to help facilitate the iteration review and retrospective. The lessons learned from that first iteration, we then roll into planning for the second iteration. And if things are going well, as a coach, by that time, I'm really just a fly on the wall. Here's what we'll cover in this webinar. Now we've covered introductions, we'll talk about the iteration mechanics of an Agile team, the roles on the team, the product backlog, planning the iteration, tracking progress of the team through the iteration and beyond the iteration, And then I'll wrap up with some observations that I've had with things that teams struggle with early on. A quick overview of the mechanics of an iteration. The iteration begins with the pooling of items off the product backlog for delivery in the iteration. The tasks identified by the team to complete the product backlog items compose the iteration backlog. During the iteration, the team meets each day to plan that day. And at the end of the iteration, the team produces a product increment. Let's take a closer look at the parts. Iteration planning is iterative and collaborative. The product owner, a role which we'll describe in a little more detail in a few minutes, describes the items in the product backlog, and with consultation from the team, sets their priority. The team will pool the highest priority items off the backlog and identify tasks needed to complete the backlog items. The level of effort required to implement each task is determined by the owner of the task. It is, after all, they who are going to be doing the work. Task ownership is a collaborative, not directed process. Self-selection being the best means to ensure commitment. The team will only plan the work they know they can complete, and this determines when they stop pulling items from the product backlog. At the end of iteration planning, the team commits to delivering the selected items. There is also a reciprocal commitment that, barring any emergencies, the organization will make a similar commitment to the team to not change the scope of the iteration or impede their progress through the iteration. So what do we do during the iteration? Well, we perform all the tasks necessary to deliver the product backlog items we committed to. And every day we hold a daily stand-up. It's a simple meeting where we answer 3 basic questions. What did you work on yesterday? What are you working on today? Do you have any impediments? At the end of every iteration, we produce a product increment that is high quality, tested, complete, and done. It should be ready for release, even if that's just an internal release. At the end of the iteration, we demonstrate our product increment to the product owner, and other stakeholders. Everyone's invited. We prepare minimally, and it's an informal occasion. So no slides or documents, please. Let's keep it informal. After the iteration review, we have a retrospective. Inspection and adaptation is the keystone of continuously evolving and improving team, a concept Taiichi Ohno from Toyota called Kaizen. During the retrospective, the team might ask 3 questions. What did we do well? What didn't we do well? What do we need to change to do better? You can adjust these questions. The key thing here is to gather data and to create insights into how you can improve your team. At Rally, we recommend you have a retrospective at the end of every iteration. It doesn't have to last for hours. In fact, an iteration might last as little as 30 minutes. The most important thing is to listen to what's said in the retrospective and act upon it. Let's have a quick overview of the key roles on an Agile team. The Scrum Master facilitates the team and the team's relationships with outside interests. The Scrum Master is the servant leader of the team. They work at removing impediments to the team's progress. They enforce the values and practices that the team and the organization subscribes to. Yet, They don't make decisions for the team on time and budget commitments. That's for someone else to do. The Scrum Master is the servant leader of the team. The next role in the Agile team is a product owner. The product owner represents or is the user or client. It's important that the product owner is one voice, even if they're not one person. They determine what to build and in what sequence. Yes, they might discuss that with the team, but wherever there is a disagreement, the product owner, who is, after all, the proxy, or maybe the customer, wins that discussion. The product owner also conveys expectations internally, externally, and they define the project goals. The delivery team. The delivery team is typically 5 to 9 people. There's no reason why it couldn't be less than 5. We find sometimes, though, if it exceeds 9 people, then a lot of the high bandwidth communication on an Agile team starts to drag at the team. Planning takes longer. Daily stand-ups take longer. So we find it's a good idea not to exceed that number of 9. Ideally, you're looking for full-time members of the team. Now, I know a lot of you out there struggle committing full-time to a team. So I just want to state this is a gold standard. I'd like to see you achieve this and aim to get there. Because ideally, full-time members will be much more productive. Your team will be more successful with full-time members. The team is also self-organizing and self-managing. We like the team to have cross-functional skills as well. This enables the team to be more flexible and adaptable. That's not to say you can't bring in subject experts when you need them, but cross-functional members of the team will give you a lot more flexibility and adaptability. And of course, it goes without saying that inflated egos will not be comfortable on an Agile team. The product backlog. The product backlog is a list of desired product features, either completely new product features, changes to existing features, or fixes to existing features, also known as bugs or defects. The product backlog is expressed so that each item on that backlog is value-focused. The product backlog is prioritized and owned by the product owner. Anybody could add to the product backlog, but it's the product owner who decides when things are taken off that backlog. And then, of course, the product backlog can be reprioritized continuously by the product owner, but of course, without disrupting the scope of the current iteration. Bill Wake gives us a handy acronym called INVEST that reminds us that our product backlog items need to be independent, negotiable, valuable, estimable, sized appropriately, and testable. Invest. Let's invest in quality product backlog items. Next up, let's break things up a little bit. Let's do something a little bit different. You're probably tired of listening to me for the last 15 minutes. Let's insert a little polling question. This is a little bit of a non sequitur, but it's something I care passionately about. Our software as a service business model at Rally. So the question is, who benefits the most from a software as a service business model? The company? The customer? The delivery team? The environment? Or all of above? Take a couple of moments to think about that and click on your answer. Then we'll continue with the rest of the webinar. Okay, thanks everybody. I see we've got some results in, and everybody thinks all of the above is the most popular answer. So thanks for everybody for participating in that. And that's a first for me because I've never done an online poll like that. So hope that was fun. Let's move on to the next slide. Various techniques can and are used for capturing items in the product backlog. The predominant technique today that we see, and the one that we believe represents the best possible start for a new Agile team, is user stories. Traditionally, user stories are captured on a 3x5 index card to discourage too much detail. The story, after all, is a placeholder for a conversation between the product owner and the team, with acceptance criteria being added when appropriate to objectively clarify expectations. We like this template here for a user story as it captures three important aspects to help all understand the value and real needs of that story. And here's a little example for you all. As a dog, I want to be able to order food online so that I don't have to rely on people anymore. We know by looking at this story who needs it, what they want, and why do they want it. Now, I particularly like this last part of the story, the so that part, because customers don't, in the end, want software developed. They just want their problem solved. So a good, talented business analyst with a good, talented team will pick up on the root cause and perhaps solve it in a cheaper, better way than developing software. If we don't articulate the so that, we're never going to get to that decision point. We're going to miss the opportunity to really deliver customers something they really need. Estimating is a key component of the self-organizing, self-managing Agile team. Yet traditionally, in software development, we're not good at estimating. In fact, we're very bad at estimating. And I dare say those of you who are on the call might have some horror stories to tell about how you underestimated on a previous project and got yourself in trouble. It turns out, though, we're quite good at comparing things. If you don't believe me, try breaking a chocolate bar in two and asking my kids which is the larger piece. They'll soon tell you. And 99 times out of 100, they'll have the right answer. In fact, I think 99.999 times out of 100, they'll have the right answer. Agile estimation taps into this ability to be able to accurately predict based on comparison, and we couple it with empirical evidence on how long it has taken us to do similar things to help us better predict and plan. For example, let's say you have some piles of logs to be split before winter. You eyeball the piles, it looks like there's one small pile. A second pile seems like it has twice as many logs, and the biggest looks like it has 3 times as many logs. So you've never split logs before, and you've no idea how long it's going to take, but you can dedicate 2 hours a day, Saturdays and Sundays. After the first weekend, you get the smallest pile done. So you estimate from there, you have about 5 weekends worth of work left to do. This technique is called relative estimation, and after a few iterations, Agile teams become very good at predicting completion based on the relative estimates and the empirical data they've collected about how fast they can split logs, or rather, deliver completed work. Note, our estimates never decay. We may speed up and get better at splitting logs, But that second pile is always going to take twice as long to split as the first. Comparing stories. As we estimate items on the backlog, we consider not just effort, but complexity and doubt. Remember our log pile. Maybe there might be some hidden surprises in there. Maybe there's a snake hiding under the log pile or something. Or perhaps we have some hardwood logs, or logs with lots of knots in them. And we know that those are harder to split than regular logs. Once we've looked at the size of our stories, we might want to attach values to them. And some Agile teams just use what we call t-shirt sizes. Small, medium, large, extra large, extra, extra large. And sometimes this is a good enough way to indicate size when you're doing a first cut estimation. More often, we see teams attaching story points. Story points allow for easier comparison. An 8-point story will take a team 4 times longer to complete than a 2-point story. Relative estimation is always faster than absolute estimation. There's just something about talking in hours and days that really affects the decision process. And remember that absolute estimates do decay. So as we get better at the work, we would need to go back and change our absolute estimates. Even relative estimation can get bogged down sometimes, and it takes a strong facilitator to keep the team on track and remind them that more effort doesn't always yield a better estimate. A popular and fun technique for collecting relative estimates is a game called planning poker. Planning poker moves along fast. It treats everyone as equals. It unearths valuable dialogue, and it increases the tacit knowledge within the team. If you like to try planning poker cards are available from many sources. We give them out during our classes, and also Mike Cohen offers a free online version. Velocity is a term you may have heard often in the context of an Agile team. We all know what velocity is. It's how fast we go. Don't tell Mr. Collins, my high school physics teacher, but if you like, velocity equals speed. But what's that got to do with an Agile team? Well, if we've established a fairly predictable pace in our team and know how much work we can complete in an iteration, we can use that measure to help us predict how long it will take us to complete our product backlog. This can be very useful in long-range planning, when we're planning our releases and making long-term commitments. Look at this graphic for just a second. You'll see there's 3 lines, green one, an orange line, red line. A mature team will be confident that they will, at the very worst, not go slower than their slowest velocity. So they can safely commit to the product backlog items above the green line. They will have a gut feeling that they will probably match their average velocity and deliver the items between the green and orange lines. Their upside forecast is that they might pull in items between the orange and red line, but they have no evidence to indicate that they will be able to deliver any of the items below the line of despair, the red line. Let's look at iteration planning in more detail. In order to know how much to pull off the backlog and plan for our sprint, we first need to know our capacity. Next, we pull the highest priority item off the backlog that we can fit in our iteration. This we do in concert with the product owner. We discuss that item in enough detail to identify tasks that need to be performed, and of course the product owner will be there to provide clarification and discussion. We then estimate the tasks. The team decides if they can commit to this product backlog item, and then we continue until we've fully committed for the iteration. Note, we estimate tasks in hours, not story points, and we use ideal hours. An ideal hour is the amount of time to complete a task with no distractions. Let's walk through this planning process. The technique I'm going to outline now is called capacity-based planning. We find it works very well for new Agile teams who may not know their velocity or trust it enough to use it to make commitments. Looking at this team, we see we have 4 team members, each with a different capacity for the iteration. The total capacity for the team is 222. Let's have a look at the first item on the product backlog, the highest priority item. We identify 3 tasks for that product backlog item. And Mike, Vish, and Lakshmi have stepped up and said that they'll perform these tasks. And their estimates are in. Mike estimates it'll take him 6 ideal hours to code the UI. Vish estimates it'll take him 8 hours to code the middle tier. Lakshmi estimates 4 hours for her to create and automate the tasks. Can we commit to this story? Yes, we can. It's the first story. We've got lots of capacity. We haven't filled up yet. Let's have a look at our second story. Can we commit to this? Yes, of course we can. Now, I'm not going to take you through every single story in the backlog. Let's go have a look at story 9 and see if we can commit to this. Well, Fish is at full capacity. Mike, too, pretty close. Lakshmi, Jeff's got a little bit left. Can we commit to this story? Yes, just. How about story 10? Can we commit to story 10? No. This is what happens if we tried to pull in story 10. Everybody would be over capacity. So it looks like for this iteration, what the team can commit to are stories 1 through story 9. If indeed they move faster and get more done, they can perhaps pull in story 10 later. But it looks for now as if it's going to be done in the next iteration. By the way, my colleague Ben Carey has a very good post out there on our Agile blog, and he talks about teams not committing themselves above 70%. A lot of the teams I coach like to try and fill themselves up to 100%. Ben talks in his post about the dangers of going above 70%. So that might be interesting reading for you all. So how do we track the progress of a team? Let's look at some charts. Let's look at some burn down charts. Maybe that's a new term for you. Burn down is a term we use to describe the rate at which items in the backlog are being completed. This screenshot shows us the burn down for a release backlog. The red line shows scope being added to the release backlog, and the convergence of the red and blue lines shows us expected completion. If you look down the bottom here, the projected release date is 6/30/09. So it looks like this team is in pretty good shape. An iteration burn down is updated daily by the team and shows us how the team is progressing. From this burn down chart, we can see the team is on schedule. The blue bars representing the hours remaining to do within the iteration are below the ideal burn down, the dark blue line that goes from top left to bottom right. The green bars you can see increasing, that's the stories being accepted as the iteration proceeds. Let's contrast that with this burn down chart. This burn down chart represents a team that struggled from the very start of the iteration. You'll see that even on the third day, they were above that dark blue line. And at the end of the iteration, they completed less than 50% of the work. And even less, perhaps 40% of the stories they'd committed to for that iteration. Time for another break. Let's do another poll question. And here I'd be interested in finding out from people, what Agile challenges are your team struggling with? Are they struggling just getting started? Are they struggling knowing where we're going? Estimating work? Breaking down stories? Or getting testing done earlier and not incurring technical debt? Take a minute, have a look at the question, and submit your answer. Great, let's have a look. That's interesting. We've got a fairly widespread and broad set of results. It seems the things that people are struggling with most is estimating the work, followed by breaking down the stories. So now that I've covered what we teach during our Implementing Agile Teams class, one of my favorite classes, that's the easy part, really. Change is always difficult. So now I'd like to share with you some of my own personal observations and experiences. I work with new Agile teams, and there are always times when they have to make some difficult choices, and often the shortcut is not the best way. Here is a collection of some of the tough questions I see, and my advice to you when you're faced with some of these decisions yourself. One of the most important things to do, yet it never ceases to amaze me at how little time organizations take to make sure everybody knows where they're going. And really, it's essential to establish a shared vision, to communicate it often, and to revisit it regularly to make sure everybody knows what lies ahead. Some popular tools for establishing a vision. Jeffrey Moore tells us to imagine that we're in an elevator, pitching our idea to a venture capitalist. A more detailed breakdown of the vision would be a data sheet that might augment the elevator statement with key features, stakeholders, and timeline. Jim Highsmith introduced us to the vision box game, where we imagine we are creating a box containing the product that will sit on a shelf and try to capture a shopper's attention. Imagine you're writing a press release. That may be a fun exercise. I'm sure you've got other creative ideas for establishing and sharing a vision. The main point, though, is making sure we're all headed in the right direction. Or as my old friend Vladdy from Luxembourg once said, make sure we get people's noses pointed in the right direction. It seems only natural for the product owner, the stakeholders, the users, to want to know when the product will be delivered, when it will be released. And unfortunately, there seems to be a perception out there that Agile teams don't want to answer this question. They want to be left alone. And the standard answer is, don't worry, we'll let you know when we get there. Of course, the reality is you need to set expectations. At the high level, the product roadmap sets expectations for each release, the theme of the release, and the main features targeted for that release. This, by the way, is a real product roadmap from one of our Rally product teams. Agile teams make commitments at a higher level, deferring commitment and effort on the details until a maximum of information is available. Where we have contractual commitments to make, instead of little line items for each work item or task, we have bigger boxes for a contracting agent to check off. This allows for a more flexible scope and allows your client to make changes without needing to negotiate or submit a change order for every little change they need to make to the requirements. We can't break our stories down. I often hear this from new teams. They have difficulty breaking their stories down, sometimes their tasks too. And as such, the stories and tasks can't be completed in an iteration. When the Spanish explorer Cortés landed at Veracruz, the first thing he did was scuttle his ships. Then he told his men, "You can either fight or die." Burning his ships removed a third alternative, giving up and returning to Spain. If we're to realize the benefits of an Agile approach, we need to be able to divide our work into small, value-adding increments that can be independently scheduled. You need to find a way to be creative. You might even need to fight to make this happen. Besides, most stories can be split. And to quote Bill Wake again, in his excellent article, the URL of which is provided here, he shows us 20 different techniques to get us started. And if those 20 techniques aren't good enough for you, I'll give you another 10 techniques from Rally. It's very important to break your stories down into smaller, value-adding increments. Another thing I hear sometimes is relative estimation is for experts. Some teams are reluctant to use relative estimation and assume it is a more advanced technique for expert teams. Nothing can be further from the truth. Without relative estimation, planning will take much longer, estimates will quickly become obsolete, and management will start to judge teams on their inputs and their estimation ability, not the value that they're delivering. Sometimes it is those with more open minds who are better able to adapt to a new skill. Relative estimation may feel strange at first, but stick with it. Be patient. Use the retrospective. If you do, you will be rewarded. Planning will be faster, more participatory, and your ability to predict release dates will be greatly improved. Another thing I hear often, I don't know enough to estimate. I often hear people saying this. I'm just a tester, they might say. An Agile team is a collaborative team. Everybody participates in planning. If you don't know enough to estimate, don't worry. Give it a try. You'll be surprised at how much you do know. Perhaps your voice will be the voice of reason, but at the very least, through equal participation in planning, you will gain valuable insights into the team that will pay dividends in the future. One perspective is no less valuable than other perspectives. It may be different, but there is inherent value in that. Even if you're not the subject matter expert, your opinion is still valid, and the more people are aligned, the greater the chance of groupthink. I love this quote from James Surowiecki's book, The Wisdom of Crowds. Groups that are too much alike find it harder to keep learning because each member is bringing less and less new information to the table. A lot of teams struggle with getting everything done in an iteration. It's a common problem. If you look inside a professional kitchen of a top restaurant, you will notice how clean and tidy it is. People may be moving fast, but the flow is smooth. Now let's look at your home kitchen. If you're like me, there's a very good chance your sink might look like this when you're holding a big dinner party. Things get backed up. You can't clear the table because there is nowhere to put the dirty dishes. And even if the table was clear, you couldn't serve the next course because the whisk for the cream is buried under a mountain of dirty dishes. If you ran a professional restaurant like this, customers would get frustrated at your inability to deliver, and you wouldn't stay in business for very long. We see this kind of delay a lot on development teams. It's called technical debt. You often see it when testing gets pushed to a later date and impacts the ability of a team to release on demand. In the scenario depicted here, the code implemented in the first iteration cannot be released for 8 weeks. Also, there is a danger of creating silos, which will increase complexity, impact communication, and add further risk. Pulling testing into earlier iterations is an improvement. But we still need to be careful. Don't make an iteration a mini waterfall. Pushing testing to the end of the iteration can add risk. Better to spread testing out across the iteration and have a smoother flow. Here's an example of a team that's doing exactly that. This burn down chart shows an Agile team that is accepting stories throughout the iteration and avoiding the stress of pushing acceptance to the end of the iteration. So to sum up some of those nuggets of advice, I just want to say this to close before I hand back to Jessica. Set clear goals and expectations. Focus on small, value-add increments. Involve the whole team. And trust the retrospective. Thank you for your time. I'll hand you back to Jessica before we start the Q&A part of this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. I do want to remind our audience members before we start the Q&A session that you can submit your questions by typing it in the question window on the left-hand side of your console and then clicking the Submit button. As mentioned earlier, we're going to try and answer as many questions as possible before the hour ends. But we do have a lot in queue, so some of the unanswered questions will be answered offline by our speaker. During the Q&A session, a brief survey will appear in your console. If you would, please take a moment to complete that survey. Your response will help us to develop our web seminar program to best fit your needs. We'll also direct your browser to a page on Rally's website that contains info to help new teams be successful with Agile. Now, with that, we're just going to go right on into Q&A. And Ken, this person asks, can virtual teams successfully adopt the Agile technique?
Yes, I believe they can. And I think what you hear a lot of rhetoric out there that says Agile teams need to be co-located. And, of course, the truth is that if you co-locate a team, it will be successful at whatever it's doing. But it's not realistic in today's day and age to co-locate your teams. There's very good reasons why people need to be distributed. Throughout the world, throughout the country, people need to work from home sometimes. So, yes, virtual teams can successfully adopt the Agile technique. And indeed, the great majority of our customers do fall into that category. Because, of course, when you are distributed, the value of an Agile team becomes greater and greater. And it really is an imperative for a distributed team.
How do you handle frequent changes in requirements or frequent change in requirements?
Well, an Agile approach is a little bit different than a traditional upfront planning-based approach. When you have a traditional upfront planning-based approach, you make quite a significant investment in your requirements. The analysis of them, perhaps you're using some fairly heavyweight technique. So when your requirements change, it's hurting your team because you've already spent resources and time on those requirements. On an Agile team, the requirements sit in the product backlog. And while they're sitting in the product backlog, there's very little investment in them. So we can change them regularly without hurting too many people. And the concept here is deferring commitment. We defer commitment. And in Mary Poppendick's book, she has a great example from Toyota. The Toyota Prius was one of the fastest cars from concept to production in modern history. And the Toyota Prius was initially conceived as a car that they wanted a car that did 47.5 miles per gallon. And only later in the process did they commit to a hybrid engine. So Agile teams will defer that commitment. Because they've deferred that commitment, they're deferring investment and cost, and they can move quicker and they can adapt to changing requirements better. Francesca, I apologize. I called you Jessica earlier.
That's okay. All right. We're moving right along. If our Agile adoption is challenged in several ways, where would you recommend we start with trying to improve?
That's a very good question. So, not that all the other questions aren't good. I think what you need, if your Agile adoption is challenged, I would recommend a couple of things. You want to have a look at the retrospective. See if you're still holding the retrospective. See if what the team has said in the retrospective is being acted upon. I suspect maybe it's not. It's perhaps you might want to have a coach in there, a third-party coach. Every customer is unique, but there are certain patterns we do see when working with customers. And sometimes observing a retrospective or even a daily stand-up is enormously helpful to help us diagnose what may be wrong with the team.
Can you define what is meant by being a self-organizing and a self-managing team?
Yes. Well, when you look back at iteration planning, we're pulling items off the product backlog. We're identifying the tasks that need to be implemented to complete those backlog items. And this is not a directed process. There is not a project manager saying, hey, Fred, could you take this task? Hey, Lucy, could you take this task? The team together identifies the tasks that need to be done, and the team steps up and they volunteer for tasks. As a Scrum Master, when this is happening, I don't prompt people. If there's silence, there's silence, and eventually someone will say, well, I'd like to do this, but I'm already busy, or I'd like to do this, but I'm not sure if I have the right skills. And then I can respond with, well, is there someone else on the team that might like to help Joe do this task?
How can you initially sell Agile project techniques to a customer used to and comfortable with traditional waterfall project techniques?
Well, that's a difficult challenge a lot of people have. There is an expectation with the customer that they have a fixed set of requirements. That is exactly what they expect to be delivered. So a couple of things you need to do there is see if you can make a commitment at a larger level. For example, in this release, we will implement single sign-on. So that's a fairly high level of commitment. Another thing is to kind of turn it around and take the negativity out of things and talk about the positives. If we put in place a process where we don't need to fix the scope so early, and we can defer commitment, we can make decisions in the customer's best interests. After all, after the customer has seen one or two early iterations, they often feel quite differently about what they want at the end. This learning exposes new information to them. And also, there's a marvelous piece of information that can help you, and it's the Standish Group's 2006 Chaos Report. And in a survey of completed projects, they discovered that of the features delivered in those projects, only 20% were frequently or always used. So there's an awful lot of waste in software development. Now, do we know that waste up front? No, we don't. We don't have the information up front. So the best we can hope for is an empirical process versus a plan-based process, which will say we'll do the most important things first. And that gives us a better chance to eliminate that waste.
One person writes, and I think that you said this, expressed so that each item is value-focused. Would you provide a couple of examples? And this person says, in our environment, this is the most challenging task.
So what we need to do is that bullet was a little bit nebulous because value to whom, that's the question. Value to the end user, the customer. And sometimes the customer is somebody external to the organization. Sometimes value is somebody who's internal to the organization. If you have a very large project, and earlier in my career I worked on a $890 million air traffic control system, we had a lot of internal customers there. Some teams were purely working on infrastructure. They were delivering internally. So when you're articulating value, you have to think about what the need is for the customer. What do they really need out of this feature? And to try and break it up. Again, Bill Wake has a great example. He uses a cake. And unless maybe you're a child, when you eat a cake, you take a slice through the cake. You don't eat the sprinkles, the icing, the sponge. You take a slice through the cake. So customers, they're not so interested in the middleware. They don't care about the middleware. They don't care about the user interface layer. They just want features. Right? I want to be able to update my personal health record online. Right? So that's valuable to them. So if you if you force yourself, if you work hard at articulating the value to the end user, you're going to set yourself in a position where you're going to be delivering value because your whole approach is going to be value focused and based on value.
What core metrics would you use to gauge the success of a project in an Agile environment?
Well, I'm not a big lover of metrics, personally. I often find metrics will show you what you already know. So I do find that the burn down charts are very useful in predicting completion of a time of the team. Also, you'll see certain signatures in the burn down charts that you'll be able to apply a certain pattern to. For example, an iteration burn down chart that's very flat at the beginning, that enables me to have a discussion with the team and say, well, you seem to be off to a slow start. Did something happen there? And it might be that they spent longer in planning than they thought they would. Maybe they were just exhausted from the previous iteration. But these charts and the trends in those charts are a basis for discussion. I see a tendency in some management teams to want to compare teams, and they look at the velocity of the teams. And I don't personally subscribe to that. I think the danger there is it can encourage the wrong set of behavior. A team can easily improve their velocity by producing lower quality work. They can easily increase their velocity by taking on easier work. So you don't want to encourage the wrong set of behavior with the metrics. So my advice is just be very careful with the metrics and see if you can measure success based on the outputs of the team versus the inputs of the team.
Well, we've reached the top of the hour, but we have a lot of questions in queue, so I'm going to take 5 more minutes to ask you a few more questions, Ken. And this, just starting off with the next one. What is the best way you found to keep user stories manageable? Do you have any examples of iterations that improved over time in breaking down their user stories?
Yes. It's not unusual for teams to start with very large stories. And I had a team recently, they started with one story in their first iteration. And having such a large story in your first iteration, I saw it and I could have done something about it, but I let it go. And the danger with having one story, of course, is if you fail with the one story, you fail with the whole iteration. So what I did with this team is when I came back at the end of that iteration, luckily they managed to get the story done. And the next story they pulled off the backlog, it was a very similar story in some ways to the first one. I said, you know what? Let's see if we can break the story down a little bit, see if it's going to help you. And they were able to do that. They broke that one large story down into 5 or 6 different stories, and it made things flow a little bit smoother on the team. They had a better understanding of what was required. The tasks made more sense to them. The tasks were smaller as well. And if you go and read Bill Wake's article on 20 techniques to break down a story, really, if you were to stereotype what Bill says there, you can break stories down into the difficult part and the easy part. So, for example, here's a difficult thing. Here's an easy part. Our application has one user. Difficult part. Application has 3 concurrent users. Difficult, maybe we could save error logging until another iteration as well. Or as Mike Cohn says, there's really 2 types of stories. There's compound stories and there's complex stories. When you've got a compound story, it's easy to break it down into its pieces. If you've got a complex story, it's a little bit more difficult. Luckily, complex stories, you don't see them very often. But the technique with complex stories is you break them down into discovery and then implementation.
What qualities should a Scrum Master have?
Scrum Master needs to be a good listener. A Type A person will not be a good Scrum Master. A Type A person could be trained to be a good Scrum Master, but it takes time. It takes a certain maturity. I really like what Jim Collins describes in his book, Good to Great, a level 5 leader. And a level 5 leader kind of embodies the qualities of Scrum Master. My colleague Gene Tabeka talks about a Scrum Master being a servant leader. They're a leader in service to the team. So those sorts of people Jim Collins talks about, when something's going right, they look out the window and they look at their team and they give their team credit and praise. If something's going wrong, they look in the mirror and they blame themselves. So a Scrum Master has to have a certain amount of ability to remove the impediments. They have to know who to speak to in the organization. So that does make it difficult sometimes for a junior member of the team to be a Scrum Master. But that's not to say there's not successful teams out there with junior members of the team who are very, very good Scrum Masters.
Okay. And this is going to be the last question. What is the level and detail of training required to bring new Agile teams online?
Online? Oh, up to speed? Well, what we like to do, and I really love this offering from Rally. I'm fairly new to Rally. I joined last year, and we have a class called Implementing Agile Teams. And I love how we spend time with the customer. We explain the concepts of Agile and Lean as well to our customers. We have some simple exercises we give them to help them with their muscle memory. And then the next day we actually do some real work with them. We plan their first iteration. We go away and leave them for 2 weeks or 3 weeks or however long their iteration is. Then we come back, we help them retrospect, we help them do their iteration review, and then we help them plan their second iteration. I have a lot of fun delivering that class. No two customers are the same, and it gets everybody off to a really great start.
Wraps up our Q&A session, and it also ends our event for today. I'd like to thank our speaker, Ken, for his time. And I would also, you're welcome. I would also like to thank Rally Software for sponsoring this event. Also, a special thank you goes out to you, the audience, for spending the last hour with us. Have a good day, and you may now log off.